Hall and Wilcox acknowledges the traditional custodians of the lands on which this podcast is recorded. We pay our respects to their elders, past and present, and to all First Nations people joining us today.
Hello, and welcome to the third episode in our series looking at the latest developments in health practitioner regulation across Australia. I'm Bridget Wall, a partner at Hall and Wilcox, and I'm joined here today again with my fellow partner at Hall and Wilcox, Mitch Stein, as we explore the area of vapes. Welcome, Mitch.
Thanks, Bridget.
We are also joined today by a special guest, Luke Kelly. He's a pharmacist and the New South Wales branch president for the Pharmaceutical Society of Australia. Welcome, Luke, and please tell us a bit about yourself.
Well, thank you for that. Thanks for the invitation. As mentioned, I'm the New South Wales president of the PSA. Wear a lot of hats, involved with the local pharmacist group in Newcastle and the Hunter Valley, connected to the university, do the occasional bit of locum work, also a pharmacy broker, sell the bloody thing. So yeah, lots of things in the air. So yeah,
lots of hats.
Lots of hats.
Many hats.
Yeah. No hair, plenty of hats. Yeah.
Well, today we're going to be discussing the topic of vapes, and it's fair to say it's probably an understatement that vapes have had a pretty big year in Australia, and the regulation of vapes in Australia has been evolving over the past 12 months. I think it's worthwhile to set the scene and get an overview of where things are at. Mitch, what changes have we seen in relation to the regulation of vapes and laws around selling vapes in the past year?
Yeah, thanks, Bridget. So in May 2023, the Australian government announced reforms to the regulation of vaping products. These reforms being implemented in partnership with the states and territories in stages over the course of this year and next year, and change the way that vapes can be imported, manufactured, supplied, and advertised in Australia. So when we talk about vapes, and the legislation encompasses vaping substances, vaping accessories, and vaping devices. The centrepiece for the reforms is the Therapeutic Goods and Other Legislation Amendment Vaping Reforms Act of 2024, which commenced 1 July of this year. On 1 July, the law changed so that all vapes and vaping products, regardless of whether they contain nicotine or not, can only be sold in a pharmacy for the purpose of helping people quit smoking or manage nicotine dependence. The Act prohibits the importation, domestic manufacture, supply, commercial possession, and advertisement of disposable, single-use, and non-therapeutic vapes. So it does not ban all vapes. It's illegal for any other business, such as a tobacconist, vape shops, and convenience stores, to sell any type of vape or vape product. And then from 1 October of this year, so just recently, people 18 years and older can buy vapes from participating pharmacies with a nicotine concentration of 20 milligrams a milliliter or less without a prescription, where state and territory laws apply. Must stress that each state and territory has different legislation in terms of what is available. So you need to check on that before, for practitioners in those particular states. So a patient and customer must speak with a pharmacist before purchasing a vape. And that conversation should include discussing the product and dosage, discussing other options to quit smoking and or manage nicotine dependence, providing identification for proof of age purposes only. Pharmacists can only supply 1 month's supply purchased over the course of 1 month. People under 18 years need a prescription, so that remains as it was before 1 October to access vapes, where state and territory again laws apply and allow to ensure they get appropriate medical advice and supervision. People requiring vapes with a higher concentration of nicotine, more than 20 milligrams a milliliter, are also require a script regardless of their age. Flavours that are available through pharmacies are restricted to mint, menthol, and tobacco, and vapes must adhere to plain pharmaceutical packaging standards. The TGA is leading the development of these reforms. The TGA website has some really helpful information to practitioners and those interested through their vaping portal. In terms of advertising, the new Public Health Tobacco and Other Products Act of 2023, which started 1 April of this year, 2024, that is, the same bans that apply for tobacco advertising and sponsorship also apply for vapes. Therapeutic goods that are not included in the ARTG are known as unapproved goods, and we discussed this previously in our previous episode with medicinal cannabis. There are currently no vapes for smoking cessation or the management of nicotine dependence included in the ARTG. Now, that's important. They're all unapproved. Therefore, no vapes have been assessed by the TGA for quality, safety, and efficacy or performance. Unapproved therapeutic vapes must comply with the relevant TGA product standards. So it's a bit like medicinal cannabis. We're still very much in a stage of understanding the use of vapes and their role, I guess, in the in assisting patients through nicotine replacement therapy. So that's a brief overview of what has occurred over the last 12 months in terms of legislative developments and where we're currently at.
Luke, these are quite substantial changes, and I'm interested in your observations regarding the introduction of these new laws.
Well, I think the most important thing to note about all that Mitch just said is that these are products that have not been assessed for quality, safety, and efficacy. Now, as a pharmacist professionally, that's a very uncomfortable position to be in. We're meant to be providing a product for a therapeutic need, and we haven't even got any real certainty about the product. So the attitude of pharmacists has been very reticent to be involved in this process. You will have noticed the Guild have sort of made it clear that this is something they're not happy with. The PSA also agree with that position, having made a decision nonetheless to provide guidance around how we can service customers that require this product. But as on the ground at this stage, as I've said earlier, a lot of pharmacists aren't going to engage with this. It's just not a comfortable position to be in professionally. But also the demand has been weak, to say the least. Certainly the regulators have not been able to stem the flow of illegal supply. It's pretty obvious, we all know where we can get these things, and the evidence, well, I've been told that these the retailers of these products are very open that they're selling these things, and have even said to people that have questioned them, we're not expecting to get in trouble. No one knows I do this. No one's going to come and get me. So that's why, as pharmacists, first of all, we're in a position where we're not comfortable with the product. And secondly, this demand just has not arisen, despite the law saying that they're going to sort of step on this. I actually put out a request for feedback for a bunch of pharmacists in the Hunter Valley, and most people are not doing it. And those that are doing it are not getting many requests. I note one mentioned that she had 3 requests. 2 of them made bookings for a consultation, because realistically we should be doing this with a consultation. Only one of them turned up. So the first one didn't turn up, the second one turned up, and that person ended up buying an alternative nicotine replacement product. Because after all, we're only allowed to sell these as nicotine replacement products. We're not allowed to sell these for recreational use.
Yes. Do you think? Do you anticipate that's? I mean, we're 6 weeks in now from 1 October, and as you say, you haven't seen much uptake in terms of pharmacists supplying and also customers and patients attending to obtain a vape. Do you think that's going to continue, or what's your thoughts on kind of moving forward?
I think, well, there's a few reasons why. If they can't stem the supply of illegal supply, then I don't see this becoming a big seller, if you want a better expression than that. But I don't see this becoming a big seller, because economically, pharmacies aren't going to be cheap, because they have to consult, so there has to be time spent, and whether they include that as a consult fee or whether they add it to the price of the device. It's going to be an expensive way to buy a vape relative to the underground supply. So I don't see that becoming a larger product in the marketplace unless the illegal supplies shut down. And even then, because of the way that we are required to sell it as a nicotine replacement therapy product, I don't see it becoming a big product. I really don't.
That process for the pharmacist engaging with the patient to understand the need for the vape or the requirement for the vape, what have you seen or heard from those in the profession about that process, and how have they managed that process? Does it take the pharmacist quite a bit of time to work through? Like, is that a quick process? Have you heard any feedback on that?
Well, yeah, a little bit. It's actually, there's the SAS, the Special Access Scheme C form that's got to be filled in. There's a bit of process involved around that. But the feedback on that is that it's not that difficult once you become registered and you know what you're doing. There's also some enterprising gentlemen have released a software package to support this that actually provides a sequence of events, like a protocol, a process. It actually auto reminds you to get the SAS form done. It's probably the way to go. Personally, that's how I do it. It's not an expensive bit of software, and having
like a step-by-step guide type.
Correct. Yeah. And recording a recording thing, and it also lists every product that's on the TGA list. We know none of them are approved, but they are listed on the TGA website. So it's probably a handy thing. So that a few people have done that. I know the people that have put that software out have run a few webinars and they've had a great deal of interest. So I think pharmacists are trying to do this professionally in a very difficult environment. But the concern, of course, is that we're going to have agitated customers that are agitated. They've got to go through the process every time they buy a vape, which they can only do once a month, or vapes once a month. And also they're going to be agitated by the fact that it's gone from a relatively inexpensive habit to an expensive habit. But that hasn't transpired to a great degree yet.
I wonder if you would see an uptake once the vapes that are currently out there in the market might eventually be assessed and approved by the TGA. And once that step happens, maybe there might be a shift in consumer buying behaviour, but also more pharmacists being prepared to offer it as a product for their patients.
Without a shadow of a doubt. There's been rumours that companies are heading down that path, but it's all so far rumour, and no one's actually got any real sort of evidence that it's actually happening. But it would certainly make most pharmacists feel a lot more comfortable.
So currently, for pharmacists who are thinking about providing this product to patients, Luke, what guidance is available for those pharmacy practitioners when considering whether to supply a vape?
Well, the PSA, Australia-wide, engaged with the federal government when it was announced that this was going to happen very suddenly, and managed to put together a guidance, the guidelines for pharmacists. They based it on the RACGP prescribing guidelines, and it is very much a smoking cessation. It's actually called the Guidelines for Smoking Cessation. It's not called the Guidelines for Vaping. So that sort of says it all. But it's a massive document, really, to be honest with you. It's very thorough, but it is essential reading, to put it in simple terms. Not the most, probably should read it to help you go to sleep. It's one of those sort of very heavy sort of documents, but it has to be. That's what everything in pharmacy has to be precise. I just want to remind people that it's a personally handed product. You've got to be engaged with the process. You've got to record everything, and this is something that I'm sure Mitch talks about a lot. Everything has to be recorded, and you have to have an audit trail, because if you're ever challenged on something, you need the evidence to show that you've done it correctly and that you're sure. You have to be satisfied that the patient is using it for smoking cessation. That's
100%. And it's a similar. We spoke about record keeping in our last episode with medicinal cannabis, and the same thing about the assessment process and applying clinical assessment or judgment to determine that the product you're supplying is a therapeutic need, is a therapeutic benefit for the patient derived from that. And you can't, to make that assessment, you have to have a record of what you considered to form that view to then rely upon at a later point if you're challenged on that. So yeah, certainly, as you say, record keeping is a very, very important tool that I speak to all practitioners about frequently, all the time.
I'm sure you do. It's look, I think we've a lot of lessons we'll learn from the cannabis situation, like the fact that we've got to personally hand it over, so there'll be none of these mail order setups going on, which is a good thing, but yeah, I'll go back to that. If you haven't got a record of what you've done and why you've done it, it's very hard to then say a regulator, this is why I did it, if you don't have the evidence.
And I think that's particularly important when the requirements are that the pharmacist has to exercise their judgment, and you need to, in order to satisfy themselves, and they've got a professional obligation and responsibility to exercise that judgment. And I think that's really important that pharmacists, if they're challenged on that they've got a record of what, the patient, who they spoke with, what the risk factors were. Because from a legal standpoint, there's some real concerns. There could be some real concerns there about patients being provided this vaping product, or this smoking cessation product, I should say, and what its benefit will be for the patient, and particularly if there might be an adverse outcome or adverse effect from the product that's provided. So I think it's really, really important that pharmacists do take the time, again, to set up, and you spoke about your step-by-step guide. Having a process in place is the biggest, most important factor to allowing for supply of these products, and not just doing it on a whim, but actually going through the process and establishing it correctly, so that you are then well prepared when a patient or a customer does attend seeking this type of product.
Yes, exactly that. Well said.
Mitch, I guess expanding on that, and from a legal perspective, what are some of the things that pharmacy practitioners must do when supplying a vape, or when they're thinking about, okay, I want to get into supplying vapes to my patients?
Yeah, thanks, Bridget. I think it's important, again, depending on which state practitioners practice in, it's important to understand your applicable state legislation and what applies to you. There are noticeable differences across the various states, and particularly in relation to being registered to supply vapes, which I think in New South Wales, correct me if I'm wrong, Luke, you have to be registered to supply the vapes from your pharmacy. So if we talk about S3, Schedule 3 dispensing, that is without a script, which now is provided for by the legislation. So before supplying a therapeutic vape for smoking cessation or the management of nicotine dependence, a pharmacist must be satisfied that the supply is clinically appropriate for smoking cessation or the management of nicotine dependence. They must request and cite evidence of the patient's identity and age. It cannot be supplied to a third party unless they are the patient's carer. Must inform the patient that the goods are not included on the ARTG and obtain the patient's informed consent. Must provide professional advice to the patient in relation to alternative registered, which are ARTG therapies, appropriate dose and frequency, and interactions with other medications. They must ensure the quantity of the goods supplied by the pharmacist to the relevant patient does not exceed 1 month's supply within 1 month. They must provide contact details about cessation support services to the patient, and must supply the goods in accordance with the state and territory legislation and good pharmacy practice. They're kind of minimum requirements. Again, it's all about having processes and structures in place so that you can comply with these requirements when you are providing these products. For Schedule 4, so that is prescription medications, the supply of prescription-only vapes must be accompanied by a valid SAS, which Luke alluded to earlier, or AP approval or notification, or reference number from the prescriber. Pharmacists who dispense prescriptions for vapes can confirm the validity of the SAS or the AP submission by using the TGA online validation tool or by contacting the prescriber. And pharmacists must use the TGA's SAS AP online system to check the validity of the AP approval, which are just in terms of storage, the pharmacist must store all vapes, or S3, including vaping substances, vaping accessories, and vaping devices behind the counter. And I anticipate from the regulator and New South Wales, I'll speak to, that there will be audits and inspections conducted to ensure compliance, and not just with storage, but with all manner of requirements relating to vapes. And pharmacists should expect that there will be, and those audits are unannounced, and there may be an inspector turning up to audit your pharmacy at any time, and these will be some of the new things that they might be focusing on, as well as medicinal cannabis seems to be an area where, obviously, with recent changes, that the regulator is very keen, I guess, to get out there and ensure that pharmacists are complying with the new legislative requirements.
Yeah. So as of October, on the first day that this S3 rule came into place, the audit team were out there auditing pharmacies from day one.
Wow.
We spoke to them. Yeah, we spoke to them from the PSA and the Guild. We spoke to them about what their intent was. and they were assured us that it was more of an educational audit than a we're going to knock you out type audit. They were auditing pharmacies that had ordered stock, so that they would have prioritised. I'm assuming they would have prioritised people that had ordered a lot of stock. But the idea was that the audit would go in and they'd make sure people were doing things appropriately, and we were assured that this audit was not for anything else in the pharmacy. But we know when the PSU is doing an audit, they're going to go through your whole shop. However, if you've got like a bottle, as they say, a bottle of methadone sitting on the counter, which is you shouldn't, then that's going to trigger a full inspection of your shop. So if you're supplying vapes, you want to make sure everything else is in place. And you're right, Mitch, it's unannounced. Again, that's something that the Guild and the PSA have said. It's particularly difficult. They come in and they take your time. So it takes you off the floor, takes you away from your business, takes you away from your patients. So we've been arguing for 24 hours notice. That's as far as we've got. We're arguing for it.
Yeah, look, I've certainly heard that from practitioners that it can last half a day and up to a day for a complete audit to occur, depending on the size of the pharmacy and the products and the medication that is stocked. So it certainly is a very time-consuming exercise, and as I say, it potentially takes someone off the floor and to oversee, to see what's happening. So yeah, it can be a very extensive exercise for a practitioner and it's quite confronting having an inspector attend at your pharmacy and go through all of the medication, all the records, and ask you and can ask you questions. And I mean, I think it would be remiss to say that practitioners all obtain some advice as soon as an inspector arrived, because there are confines of what the inspectors are permitted to do while undertaking an audit. So practitioners should take the opportunity to seek some advice if they're concerned or have any questions about the process of an audit or an inspection. And also it has ramifications in terms of what then follows if we see there are areas of non-compliance, which then can lead to investigations against practitioners. And it's, I guess, imperative from the start to notify your insurer, professional indemnity insurer, or seek legal advice at that juncture. The earlier the better, really, to assist through the process, not just from a legal perspective, but also just to assist, through. It's a very challenging time, just to assist through, through the kind of process, the audit process, as well as the investigation process, if it follows.
I think it's also worthwhile pointing out and being clear that what the PSU, used to be the PAU, are doing is of good intent. We are trying to keep they talk about the safety of the public, and it's a totally worthwhile exercise. Doesn't mean it's not anything other than an incredibly stressful event. So
definitely, I mean, it's the pharmacy profession is one of the most highly regulated, and for a good reason. We're dealing with some really, potentially. Some Schedule A medication, for example, really potent medication that's got some real potential for abuse, diversion, misuse. So it's very important that pharmacists adhere to compliance and are aware of and are constantly on top of changes to legislation, changes to requirements, and are completing regular audits of their pharmacy to ensure compliance. And that's a really important, I think, not just in the vaping space, the medicinal cannabis space, but just generally in practice. Proprietors should be very vigilant and very much on top of the day-to-day operations of their pharmacy, conducting audits to ensure that their their pharmacy is practicing safely, and there are, if an inspector does arrive, then you're comfortable that your practices and your procedures and your or your recording is accurate and compliant. So I think it's just being on top of and being very proactive in ensuring that your pharmacy is operating as it ought to be.
So the guidelines that we talked about earlier, this is one of the reasons you need to be on top of those guidelines about vaping. If you're going to take up the challenge to supply vapes to customers and patients, you absolutely have to be aware of those guidelines. As I've said earlier, the PSA developed them, put them out, but I should also point out They're available to all pharmacists. You don't have to be a member of the PSA. Of course, you should be, but you don't have to be a member of the PSA to access them. So if you're going to go down the path of supplying vapes, I highly recommend that you have a good look at those guidelines.
Yes,
it's a good plug for the PSA.
Yeah,
that's my job.
The service that provided is excellent. I could
let alone Hall and Wilcox. Yeah.
No, that's very, very useful information, Luke. Very, very helpful for practitioners.
Aside from the audits and inspections that happen, and it may be that we're still early days yet because the legislation has only been in for a couple of months in this year. Is there any other steps by the regulator that we're seeing? Are either of you aware of any prosecutions that have taken place?
Not as yet. I think it's very, as you say, very early days. I think we're yet to see, and Luke alluded to some inspections that have occurred. I haven't yet seen any investigations coming from any inspections that arise as matters of non-compliance with this new legislation. So I think it's probably a bit early yet for those to flow through. I would say the next 6 to 12 months we might start seeing some matters that arise from non-compliance arising from inspections, but and we might also, again, they might be a bit more settled in terms of the TGA and the nature of the products that are being supplied, and some guidance available about the parameters for supplying those. I think there might be a bit more to play out than that space, but certainly it's probably a bit early yet to see. Well, I certainly haven't seen personally any investigations come through just yet.
No, I think they're still doing as they said, treating it as an educational process to begin with. But that time frame will be, it's one of the situations where if they inspect, they advise you on the right process, and they come back and you're not doing it, then I'm sure there'll be notifications coming through very thick and fast.
I think we'll leave it there. That's been a really good discussion. Thank you, Luke, and thanks, Mitch, and thanks everyone for listening today. In next week's episode, we'll be joined by a special guest, and we'll be discussing the latest developments around social media and advertising guidelines for practitioners. So hope you will join us for that discussion. As always, please get in touch with us if you have any questions. You can find our details on our website, which is hallandwilcox.com.au, or connect with us on LinkedIn. If you enjoyed today's episode, then rate, review, or follow our podcast wherever you get your podcasts.
This podcast is not legal advice and should not be relied upon as such. You should always obtain legal advice about your specific circumstances.